Coming up on this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society, we explore the world of Metroid. It's dangerous to go alone, so the Nintendo Cartridge Society goes with you. Welcome to Nintendo Cartridge Society. My name is Patrick Ellers, joined, as always, by my co-host, Mark Mitchell. How's it going, Mark?
It's going pretty good. I wonder what happens in the future if one of us can't make the recording of an episode.
Oh, does an episode happen? You mean because I always say joined, as always, by my co-host, Mark Mitchell?
Yeah. If I was gone for an episode and then I came back the following week, would you no longer be able to say as always? Would it just become joined by my co-host?
Wow. Well, I mean, that would be a dark day, right?
I mean, let's pray that day never comes.
Yeah, it has never happened to date.
Yeah.
I recorded a little bit with my parents one time.
Yes.
But
I was I present for the intro for that?
You were. Well, this was back when we did one episode that was the news
both.
And the feature.
That's right.
So that was a different time, Mark.
Different era.
That was a different show, some could argue. I don't know that I would. I think I will always say joined as always by my co-host Mark Mitchell.
Okay, I mean, I appreciate that, but I allow you to get out of that if the occasion arises.
I don't think so.
I give you wiggle room.
No,
not
I
chicken
reject
wiggle room.
Well, Mark, come on, stop taking pot shots at poor Chicken Wiggle.
It's a bad name. It's a terrible name.
Look, the chicken's name is Chicken, and the worm's name is Wiggle.
But we're not here to debate the merits of Chicken Wiggle.
No, I suppose we're not. We are here to discuss Metroid.
That's right. Tomorrow will mark the release of Samus Metroid Returns.
Metroid Samus Returns.
Wow. This might be a rough one.
No, look, this is a subject about which we are passionate, right? We are both big Metroid fans and are excited about this new game coming out. Do you feel more or less excited about it because it's a remake of an existing game?
That doesn't really affect me
mm-hmm.
One way or the other, like my excitement for this game. I'm excited because it's new 2D Metroid.
Yeah.
And it has been so long since we've had that. And everything about this game seems like it's been positively previewed.
Mm-hmm.
People who are playing it for review seem to really like it. And if this does well, it opens up the prospect of new 2D Metroid.
Yes. And possibly on the Switch?
Yeah.
Which would be great. Also, I am I'm happy to play a Metroid game every couple months, maybe every 6 months. I'm like, yeah, I could play another Metroid game. And even if that means an old one or a new one, if they just start gradually porting Super Metroid, Fusion, Zero Mission over to Switch or 3DS. I'm excited about that right now.
Well, and of the Metroid games, Metroid 2 is by far the one I have played the least amount of.
Yeah, I had a copy of The Return of Samus on my Game Boy way back in the day. But I think it was too hard or too obtuse for me as a kid. But so we're not actually gonna. Our goal today isn't really to talk about how these games play necessarily, but to talk about what elements make up the aesthetic of these games, right?
Yeah, I mean Metroid, even if it has become one of it's still one of Nintendo's flagship franchises, even if they don't really release games for it all that often anymore.
Yeah, or even ever almost. It's been so long. I guess Federation Force was just last year. But that's, can we even count that as a Metroid game?
It definitely pulls on the world that
Mm-hmm.
Metroid has created. And it's kind of that like what are the like foundational elements of Metroid that make it so beloved
Yeah,
by people like us who love these games, even kind of like the lesser ones.
sure. So let's start there. Let's figure out what the building blocks of a Metroid game is. So like what do you think a Metroid game requires?
Well, and I think it all comes back to the first Metroid game for the NES,
Mm-hmm.
just called Metroid. It coming back to it now, it's not a great game.
It is a difficult game to play for sure.
And it's
It's
really
hard to navigate. It's hard to stay alive. Um, there's so little like enemy and like environment variety.
but there's something about that game that
Hmm.
obviously like sparked people's imaginations. And the successful games in the Metroid series all kind of take these elements and iterate on them. And for me, I think one of the big things in that is that the central character is like a strong female character.
Yeah. So even though we didn't know that going in when we were playing the original Metroid, um, you came to Metroid later, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Right. So you already knew who Samus was, right?
Mhm.
Um, I remember like having that weird like kid moment of like, oh my gosh, the surprise of like she's a lady. And not, by virtue of me reaching the end of the game in the allotted amount of time, but from, like entering the code Justin Bailey and getting like the swimsuit version of Samus running around. Um, but yeah, like that's one of the kind of like core principles of the series is that Samus is this strong like uh independent, almost to like a like solo character, right? That she's on this adventure by herself.
Yeah, and that she is awesome.
Yes. Yeah, and gets progressively more awesome as you play the game. So there's that sense of like player empowerment that as you're the more time you spend in the game, the more you're just like picking up things here and there. And that's all kind of stuff that has been that you see in like any game with RPG elements, that you get stronger the longer you play. But there's, and I feel like Zelda does this as well, where like it does it all without numbers. Like you're never worried about like your her strength attribute or whatever. It's all in the things you collect and in how like those tools work to navigate the world.
And I feel like why this is such an important component of Metroid is because it's so rare. It was incredibly rare in games in the 80s, and it's still fairly rare now that you have this a central character in a game who's a woman
Mm-hmm.
and who is uh like a like take no prisoners type.
Yeah, that like her sentimentality isn't so there are obviously exceptions to everything we're saying here. I think within the series, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. But I think like yeah, like obviously as the series goes on, you have other M and even
Fusion to a lesser extent.
yeah, like Fusion to a lesser extent, where some of that like independence is taken away from the character.
Hmm.
And I don't think it's any surprise that those games are either more controversial in the case of Fusion or loathed in the case of other M,
Right.
because it's kind of the antithesis of what we want from a Metroid game.
Right. So it's I don't I think there's a hard it would have a hard time talking about the Metroid games without bringing up the Alien movie series, because they obviously share a lot of DNA, including the strong female protagonist, right? And the alien creature that our protagonist has a almost weird maternal relationship with. And I like that element of the series, even though like it's so understated in Super Metroid, or at the end of Metroid 2 and into Super Metroid, that there is like Samus spares this thing, right? She comes across the last Metroid at the end of Metroid 2. So I guess spoiler for the game that's coming out tomorrow. But that she encounters the very last Metroid, which is an infant. It hatches in front of her. And then she like bottles it up and takes it to the Space Federation and is like, "Here you go, guys. Study that thing. Keep it away from the space pirates. We don't want any more of these things flying around." And then when it is eventually stolen by pirates, she like chases after it, but still like maintains it's still like a killing machine, right? It's still like a horrible monster, but she has a relationship with it, and I value that.
Yeah, I think that's one of and you're right, it is basically ripped off from Alien
Yeah,
and the Alien series.
for sure.
But again, that's kind of part of the original appeal of Metroid.
Yeah.
Is, like you are in a weird way was like experiencing the Alien franchise.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Where it's
it does,
like,
because
yeah.
you're like alone in a hallway, right? And like there are creatures bearing down on you that are going to murder you, and like there's very little you can do. Like they are very similar experiences.
And I think that idea of isolation
Mm-hmm.
is another thing that makes Metroid a good Metroid game. Metroid
Yeah.
is, like this idea that you're just alone, and there's not a lot of NPCs. It's not like there's a lot of dialogue. You don't wander into towns
Yeah.
and to upgrade your power armor.
Boy, that'd be a bummer, right? Trading little like Chozo coins for
Yeah, like you're a bounty hunter. You
Mhm.
work on your own.
Yeah.
And again, like when the later games kind of move away from this and start introducing more characters for you to chat with is when it kind of becomes more unbearable.
So what is that? Because like I see that, there are obviously like two different Metroid series within Metroid, right? There's the vanilla series, and then there's Prime. And chronologically, Prime takes place between Metroids 1 and 2. But like you can see a similar like arc of moving out of isolation with both of these series. So like Metroid Prime and Prime 2 are both like solo adventures, right? That Samus is on more or less by herself, slowly and gradually discovering what happened on these two planets of Talon 4 and Aether, I think is the planet from Echoes. And it's not until 3 Corruption where we start to get like the other bounty hunter characters kind of like folded into that, and the whole like Space Federation, those characters start to like seep into that narrative. And the same thing is true of Metroids 1, 2, and 3, that those are, very isolated games. That Metroid 2 and, by extension, Samus Returns here are very that's an incredibly solitary game, because you're just like go on this planet, murder all these things. That like and then as you move on, the series progresses after Super, which is the third game. I guess chronologically the next one is Other M, and then Fusion. That both of those games are the more like social aspects of the character in the franchise. So too long-winded. The question is, why does it seem like both versions of the franchise, both like series, veer towards or veer away from isolation the longer they go?
I don't know if it's like a feeling of demand from what modern gamers want.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's because they're looking to switch up the formula after a couple of games. In the case of, like Other M and Fusion, it seems like Sakamoto became more interested in like story elements, and so that
Yeah.
seemed to um like and the way he did that was by incorporating outside characters into the narrative of Samus's life.
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting about that is there's so much story, so much like passive storytelling or environmental storytelling in these games, that in all of them, right? Um, that do a really good job of conveying a story that has already happened. And what we're seeing in games like Metroid Prime 3 Corruption and Fusion and um, the other one you were just saying,
Other M.
Other M, yeah, is the story happening in real time. So I think for me, one of the like foundational building blocks of a Metroid game is walking into an area and having to piece together, not even having to, but just like having the pleasure of um, figuring out what happened there, and just like taking that in.
Yeah, there was in the earlier games, and some of this I'm sure was technical limitation, like in the original Metroid, is this idea of showing and not telling.
Yeah,
There was very little story, but you didn't really need a lot of story. Like, there's not a lot of story in Super Metroid,
yeah,
in as far as like dialogue boxes or cutscenes go, but there is a lot of there are a lot of like it is telling a narrative.
yeah.
Like
You
there is a
mhm.
narrative to the game.
Yeah, and it's like world building in a way that doesn't require people shouting at each other or anything like that. Um, do you have like storytelling moments from? We could probably spend the rest of this episode just talking about storytelling moments we like from Super Metroid. But are there any of those that like stand out for you? That like things that you encounter or like little moments without any dialogue that were like effective for you or like that you like in that game
Um
or any of the 2D Metroids, I
yeah,
guess.
I feel like the for me one of the most kind of like really cool experiences was the first time I played through Metroid Prime,
Hmm.
not really knowing what to expect. And even just like the simple ability to like uh scan things and learn about them that way. It reminds me a lot of what they do in, like Bloodborne
Sure.
and the Dark Souls games, where if you want the detail, if you want like to learn more about the specifics of the world, you have that ability. But in general, you could run through the entire game and not glean any of that information
Yeah.
and still have your experience be completely rewarding.
Yeah. Um and there's so like in Prime specifically, um there is like the way that they communicate the story is so much through like logs and like notes, like researcher kind of notes. So the game takes place on Talon 4. It's a planet that has been settled at some point by the Chozo, and they discover a great poison is what they're calling it. And like there is a greater narrative about where this great poison comes from and what it is and all of that, but we don't get it in that sort of expository way. We get like kind of hard facts and figures, right? Where it's like scientific reporting on what they're experiencing. So like even though it is still reading and it's still like taking in copy that way, you're sort of still getting the story secondhand, right? Um and then even that feels like genuinely environmental and like atmospheric way of storytelling.
Well, how about you from it seemed like from Super Metroid
Oh, there are
specifically?
so many cool moments in Super Metroid. I love the your encounters with the ostrich like alien that teaches you how to do the boost where you can like spring straight up in the air. Um, I like there's a part right before the the Kraid battle where you encounter like a corpse wearing like power armor like Samus's, just like laying on the ground, and there are like green bug things all over him, and as you approach it the green bug things just fly away, like, and that's the only time where you encounter anything like that in the whole game. Is like, here's another like hardcore power armor bounty hunter who just met his end down here, and like there's more to that story, but like I don't know. That's it's so cool to me that like there it is. You do with it as you will, or do nothing with it. Yeah, those are some of my, and then just the end of Super Metroid, where the Metroid swoops in and saves you from Mother Brain. It's just it's a shade away from the actual gameplay, and feels like one of the most successful marriages of gameplay and storytelling in any game. Um, yeah, that's got to be one of my favorites.
And because there's not a lot of, in I would say the better games, a lot of like cutscenes and direct narrative and things
Hmm.
like that. So much of this it comes from the environment,
Hmm.
and so the in another like foundational building block of a solid Metroid game or of the series in general is just incredible atmosphere.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is one of the places where the first two games do sort of fail themselves, right? That like the most they can do is just like show darkness, really.
Yeah, and so obviously that was like perfected in Super Metroid,
Hmm.
but even I think the original Metroid uses like the absence of color, like uses that
Yeah,
darkness and that blackness to convey kind of like the like emptiness and like the isolation of the experience.
yeah. Well, and I mean, like the scores in all of these games are awesome, right? Like the music in every single one of these is like it they do use like themes and like individual melodies and stuff, but like most of the music is atmospheric and especially in the early games, obviously restricted by like the hardware of these things. I was just going to pull up the Metroid title screen, um because it is like really minimal and cool. Here, let's listen to a little bit of it right now. I apologize. No, okay, good. It's giving so little, right? It's so cool, and like it holds the kind of like fanfare melody until like 45 seconds into it, like halfway through its music cycle, and it still doesn't like throw out a melody. Um, it's all just so like patient, you know? And I think that is reflective of like the way you have to play the games too, right? That it's a very like hunting and trying and failing at things, and just being stuck and lost. Um, that all feels like thematically consistent to me.
And I feel like the environments of the game, like individual worlds of each game, are successful even in the like lesser entries in the series.
Hmm.
Like when we played through Metroid Other M, for our now defunct
No.
Classic Edition series,
Yeah.
uh, even like though that game wasn't great, one of the things we did like about it were the environments and like the atmosphere of the overall game.
Yeah, and that's yeah, that, I mean that is totally like a building block that like there's like that needs to be there. It's interesting thinking about um other M now and the way that all of those environments are fake, or they're all like being reproduced on this um ship, right? Uh that feels like it almost feels like a Metal Gear Solid kind of explanation, right?
It's a really cool mechanic
Uh-huh.
that is never really taken advantage of.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's also weird the way that that's sort of doubled in Fusion too, because like Fusion is you're on like a research station, and there are different environments based on like the kinds of creatures that would live there. So they're both like these artificial constructs of these natural areas, which I guess is another theme more or less of Metroid, is like the relationship between like man and nature, or like
Yeah,
technology and
yeah,
nature.
like
Yeah.
nature and science.
Yeah. And the Metroid kind of being like a weird perversion of both of them. Um, how much do you remember about the Metroid Prime like overarching story?
Not much,
S-
honestly.
So I was doing a little research because I'd played through these games, back in the day, but hadn't really in a long time. And the great poison that I referred to earlier, that the Chozo were recording in all of their notes, is revealed to be a substance called phazon, which is features in the new game, right? The Samus Returns. Um, but phazon itself being a form of energy that comes from these comets called leviathans that crash into planets and then corrupt the life forms on that planet. And the leviathans come from a planet called Phase, two A's, Phaaze, which in itself is a living organism. And the leviathans are also like living organisms. So there's like a reproduction and like creature profligation kind of theme tied up in that too. So like any of the themes of motherhood have like a sort of opposite theme of like seeding this sort of negative life energy.
An echo, one might say.
An echo, one might say. That's another thing that these games have as well, is like a copy of Samus. Um, so in Echoes, we encounter that's Metroid Prime 2, the uh, Dark Samus, which is a creature that is born of Phazon and Samus's original power suit. And in Fusion, there's a parasite that bonds with Samus and then replicates her. Um, so it's weird that there are like two different games that have like different canonical reasons to copy Samus, which I think speaks to the like Samus is so tough that like the only thing that we can fear in these games is is another Samus. I don't know. It's all cool stuff, and there's a lot like kind of looping back on itself. Did you want to listen to more music?
Always.
um. So let's just rock a little bit of the main theme for Super Metroid, and get some more of that like kind of atmospheric stuff. love that bass line. It's so cool. And then you hear it later echoed in the timpanis. And so like again, that's not it has like a fanfare in there, right? Like a heroic melody buried in there, but like you gotta get through the like kind of darker, more atmospheric stuff to get to it. Was there other let's do a little bit of the Fendrana Drifts music, yeah? From this is from Metroid Prime. It's a like kind of icier area. Also does a good job of setting, just the what am I saying here? Tone?
Yeah, scene.
Scene? Tone? Scene? The scene tone? The little loop of that melody is so short, right? Like it really just like drills into, and I think that's actually something that like all of these music cues have in common is that they like almost obsessively loop back around on like the same like little bit of rhythm or melody.
Which is kind of parallel in the game itself, because one of the things that, especially with Super Metroid, that the series kind of became known for is this idea of backtracking to areas that you have already been to, but you have probably at this point picked up a new ability or opened a new area, and so it gives you new ways to traverse
Yeah.
the environment you've already been in.
Yeah, what it's so backtracking is so strange in video games because like it's when it's done poorly, right? When it feels like it's something that's just there to like draw the game out and make it longer, like nothing gets my ire up faster than like I've already been through here, I don't care about this. But I don't know what it is about a well-designed Metroid game that makes me feel like it's always worth going back to already explored places,
Yeah, it's such a fine line between success and failure with when backtracking is implemented in games. And I think the reasons why one of the reasons why it's so celebrated in Super Metroid, and one of the reasons it's such a vital component of those Metroidvania type games,
Hmm.
is that it happens most often in parallel with getting new abilities. So when you're, instead of just like running through the same corridor again because, the game either is too cheap to create a new environment or they're trying to draw out the length of the game, you're returning to the area, but it's rewarding in unexpected ways because you're able to, something that was out of reach before is now within reach, or a new area has opened up. And so it, instead of feeling like the world is narrow and very small, it
Hmm.
works to make the world feel like richer and more realized.
Yeah, it's almost less like you're going back through old areas and more like when you went through them the first time, you were getting a preview of what it was really going to be when you were there and like had the tools to traverse the whole area.
But and even in Metroid games, it's there are games that do this very successfully, and there are games that do this not very successfully. Um, I think again, just because it's kind of an example of a not great Metroid game, Other M has moments where it feels interesting to return to areas, but it has a lot of moments
Hmm.
because so much of that game is running through corridors.
Yeah.
Uh, it like on rail. The game itself feels very guided,
Yes.
that returning to an area doesn't really have that sense of adventure or reward.
Yeah.
It feels more like just returning to an area I've been to.
Yeah. I mean, man, I have so many memories of playing the first two Metroid Prime games and like getting super missiles or power bomb or something, and just thinking this opens the whole game. That like this is gonna change everything. And you spend a couple hours like hitting various corners of the map that you've already been to, and then you're like, okay, now I don't know what to do again. But like it's so rewarding to go back to those places and realize um just what you were saying, that the world is so much wider than you thought it was. um I don't know how to naturally segue to this, but I want to bring up the item room music from Super Metroid because it's so sparse and so minimalist and so weird. So I'm just gonna play some. It sounds like someone absent-mindedly dialing a phone, right?
Again, the loop on this one is very short as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it sells the atmosphere so well.
Yeah, that it's like there's a bit of intriguing that like there's some sort of like there's a promise of something there, and then like the ominous strings under it. I just like that. That's a piece of music that like I don't hear in other games, right? Um,
Well, and it's a great example of like the tensions of a good Metroid game in general, where I mean, just like we were talking about, like that mix of like technology,
mhm.
represented by like they might actually just be like phone beeps and boops.
Yeah, no, it's just the regular like Super Nintendo sine wave played at a tritone apart, that gives it that like kind of two-tone grindy quality to it.
So that like more like unnatural sound
Hmm.
meshed with the like more what my brain registers as natural sounding strings
Right.
underneath it. This so you have that like technology and nature at all, kind of like at odds, and then you also just have this idea of a world, like there is something out there for you to explore, but the
Hmm.
world is also very dangerous.
Yes, man, I really like this series.
Yeah, when Metroid is good, it's
Yeah.
so good. And I
Yes.
think that's why everybody is so excited for for Metroid Prime 4 when it was announced, and then to have this 2D Metroid game dropped out of nowhere
Yeah.
seemingly in Metroid Samus Returns is so exciting for people like us, like fans of this series, because yeah, we had Other M a few years ago, and you've had like Federation Force, but it has been a long time since we've had a game that Metroid fans are like really excited about
Yeah.
and seems to be really good.
Well, and so that's I posed the question to you at the beginning of the episode of like, does it excite you that this is a would it excite you if it were a new game, or does it excite you that it's a remake of an older one? And for me, I'm very excited about it being like retreading that old ground, because I feel like um in recent years, or not, even not that recent years, they've lost that purchase of like what it means to be a Metroid game. And even if like the bones of Metroid 2, The Return of Samus, are, clumsy, and like the game doesn't play super well, it had the original spirit of isolation and this sort of atmospheric storytelling. So yeah, I like that they're coming back with something old, sort of, and that any future games can take cues from that.
Yeah, it's kind of the perfect game to remake because the original game itself is fairly clunky, limited by its hardware.
Yeah.
And so it'll be exciting to see a modern take on it. I can't wait to get my hands on it.
Did you read this, that Mercury Steam had expressed interest before they made this game to remake Fusion instead?
Yeah, I did see that.
It's that seems so weird, doesn't it?
Yeah, I guess it's Fusion. It has been a long time since Fusion,
Sure.
but it doesn't feel that long to me.
No, and also like just play Fusion. Like you can play it right now.
Readily available.
It's I mean, not readily available on anything
but the Wii U.
Yeah, you can play it on the Wii U, and if you were part of the 3DS Ambassador program, you have a copy of it.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
It was. Oh, that's right. Because it was. Yeah.
But otherwise, yeah, you can't. That's nuts to me. They should make it so everyone can play.
So maybe they should have. Maybe they'll remake that next.
Maybe. But I still want to see a Metroid 5 someday. Like, Fusion is as far as we've gotten in the series.
And I really feel like if this new game is successful, that an original 2D Metroid will like not be too far behind.
Yeah. But that'll be a topic for another day. That's going to do it for this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society. If you like this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes. Also, share us on social media platforms. We are at NinCart Society on Twitter, and the Facebook page is just Nintendo Cartridge Society.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on Metroid
and
what you think makes a good entry in the series, or maybe some things that we overlooked in Other M, or, I didn't love Metroid Prime 3 that much.
Yeah.
But
for the same reasons, right? Like, it's a lot of... Also, come on. Those Wii motion controls are tough.
Yeah, I will never understand the people who feel like that is the best way to play Metroid Prime.
Yeah. I bought the trilogy on Wii or on Wii U, but as with Wii controls on all three of them, and I was like, oh great, now I can't play Metroid Prime and Metroid Prime 2. But yeah, we would love to hear any of that. So you can always email us at Nintendo Cartridge Society at
gmail.com.
If you like Mark and Mine's opinions, you can check out our comic book reviews and discussions on retconpunch.com. Olivia Duncan made our what did she do?
Logo.
She made our logo. And 8-Bit Betty, who is a different person, did our music. You can check out that music right here, right now. For my co-host, Mark Mitchell, this is Patrick Eller saying thanks for listening.
What's a Creative Podcast Network?